6:05 in the morning, December 30th, 2006. In a cold concrete room in Baghdad, the executioner pulled the lever. The heavy metal trapdoor clanged open. The rope snapped tight. The grainy cell phone footage shows the dictator's body swinging. The chanting of the guards stops abruptly. The world watched Saddam Hussein meet his end. But while the cameras focused on the dead tyrant, the real story was unfolding in the shadows. Far from the gallows, two women sat in silence, Sajida Talfah and Samira Shahbandar. What awaited them now? It seemed they were safe in exile. But the death of the dictator was a starting gun for their enemies. They were not merely widows. They were the keepers of the regime's darkest files. For decades, they had lived a life of schizophrenia, extreme luxury and extreme terror. They walked through palace halls lined with Italian marble. They wore diamonds worth millions of dollars. They commanded fear with a single glance. But they also listened for the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. They knew that one wrong word meant death. At first glance, they were privileged refugees, but in reality, they were walking targets. The hanging changed the equation. The political immunity evaporated. Bank accounts froze instantly. The phone lines went dead as old allies turned their backs. The golden cage didn't just open, it dissolved. The footage from the archives captures their reality. Stiff postures at state dinners, forced smiles, eyes constantly scanning the room. To understand the devastating aftermath, we must rewind the tape. We must look at the foundation of this dynasty. Saddam's marriage was not a romance. It was a strategy, a brutal political contract signed in blood. 1963, that was the year the contract was sealed. Sajida Talfah was not merely a wife, she was a first cousin. She was the daughter of Talfah, the man who served as Saddam's uncle and political mentor. This union was never a romance, it was a strategic merger, a binding of bloodlines designed to concentrate power within the family circle. Born in 1937 in Tikrit, the archives show a harsh environment of dust and poverty. Sajida came from the same ruthless background as the dictator. She understood the rules of the tribe. In that world, loyalty was the only currency, and betrayal was solved with a bullet. From the start, she refused to be invisible. Why did Saddam tolerate her outbursts? Anyone else would have been executed for raising their voice, but Sajida was immune. She was one of the few people on earth who could challenge the president without facing a firing squad. She provided him with 5 heirs: Uday, Qusay, Ragad, Rana, Hala. For years, she reigned as the undisputed First Lady of Iraq. At first glance, a dutiful mother, but in reality, a woman of fierce intelligence and a temper that terrified the palace staff. She wielded influence like a weapon. She knew the secrets. She knew where the bodies were buried, but time works against everyone. In the 1980s, her absolute control began to crack. The threat had a name: Samira Shahbandar. The visual contrast was sharp. Sajida was tribal and hardened. Samira was blonde, sophisticated, educated in the Western style. She represented a world Sajida could not touch. Samira was already married to a high-ranking executive at Iraqi Airways. But this fact did not matter. The dictator saw her. He wanted her. Events accelerated. There was no negotiation. Saddam made a simple arrangement. Samira's husband was reassigned to a distant, irrelevant post. He did not object. He gathered his things and stepped aside. He understood the price of refusal. Saddam took what he wanted. 1986. That was the year the secret marriage began. Saddam took a second wife. Her name was Samira. For years, the public knew nothing of this union, but inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted. At first glance, a simple polygamous arrangement, but in reality, a war of 2 eras. Sajida represented the old Iraq. She was tribal, she was traditional, she was bound by blood and clan. Samira was different. She was Saddam's project, a modern face for a modern dictator. The camera records the stark difference. Archives show Samira smiling at diplomatic events, wearing Western fashion. Sajida is absent. She remained in the shadows. This dynamic created a powder keg within the presidential walls, corridors filled with whispers, servants walked on eggshells. The rivalry was not spoken aloud, but it was felt. It was only a matter of time before the spark ignited. 1995, the tension finally exploded. The trigger was Uday. He was Sajida's firstborn and the apple of her eye. He could not stand the insult to his mother. He attended a party filled with high-ranking guests. Music played, alcohol flowed, then the music stopped. Uday approached Kamal Hana Jejo. This was Saddam's personal valet, the man who had introduced Samira to the dictator. Why did Uday attack him? He claimed it was to defend his mother's honor, but the method was brutal. In full view of the horrified crowd, Uday murdered the valet. A weapon was drawn. A life ended on the ballroom floor. The guests froze in terror. Silence fell over the hall. This was not just a killing. It was a twisted message to his father, but the message backfired spectacularly. Saddam did not see loyalty. He saw a threat to his authority. Witnesses described the aftermath. The dictator flew into a rage. He did not just shout. He physically attacked his son. He beat Uday with a cane until the wood cracked. He threw him into prison. The humiliation was total. Sajida faced a choice, husband or son. She did not hesitate. She sided with Uday. She packed her things and retreated to her own compound. The family portrait was shattered. From that moment, she became a ghost in the regime, rarely seen, rarely heard. Meanwhile, Samira's star continued to rise. But this was only the beginning of the decline. Despite the hatred, both women shared one trait. They were survivors. They lived in a world where a single wrong glance meant execution. The 1990s progressed. International sanctions strangled the country. The economy collapsed. Newsreels from the era show the decay. Streets empty of cars, hospitals without medicine. But inside the palaces, the fear was personal. The women watched their husbands' paranoia grow. Every meal was tested for poison. Every guard was suspect. Their golden world began to tarnish. They felt the walls closing in. Nothing could prepare them for the final act. March 20th, 2003. The sirens wailed across Baghdad. The ground shook. American bombs rained down on the capital. The regime's time had run out. March 20th, 2003. The night sky over Baghdad turned red with anti-aircraft fire. The first missiles slammed into the presidential palaces, shattering windows miles away. But inside the crumbling empire, two women were already moving in opposite directions, Sajida and Samira. Their paths diverged instantly. Sajida Talfah did not wait for the Americans. By this time, she was estranged from her husband. She lived in a separate fortified compound with her daughters, Raghad and Rana. Intelligence reports reveal a flurry of specific activity. She didn't just pack. She emptied the safes. She shredded sensitive files. She lit fires in the courtyard. The smell of burning paper mixed with the dust of distant explosions. Why did she abandon the capital so quickly? She knew the history of Iraq better than anyone. In this country, a coup meant death, and the dictator's family always died first. She prepared for the worst. On April 9, 2003, American tanks crushed the pavement in Baghdad. The world watched the television screens. In the frame, a Marine covers Saddam's statue with a flag. The bronze figure topples. The crowd cheers. But Sajida was already gone. She had crossed the Jordanian border days earlier. It was night. The headlights cut through the desert darkness. This was not a panic. This was a protocol, a carefully calculated extraction. But for Samira Shahbandar, the exit strategy looked different. She was the favorite. She stayed. Witnesses saw her in the early days of the invasion. She moved between safe houses with Saddam. The walls shook from nearby impacts, but the noose tightened. Saddam went fully underground. Samira had to vanish. She headed for Lebanon. She did not travel light. Her luggage was heavy with millions of dollars in cash and boxes of gold jewelry. Sajida had blood ties in Jordan. Samira had none. She relied on a different currency. She called in favors from Lebanese businessmen who had grown rich on the oil for food program. At first glance, a refugee fleeing war, but in reality, a wealthy investor laundering assets. She moved through Beirut's banking district like a phantom. She converted dinars to dollars. She destroyed paper trails. She tried to build a fortress out of money. The contrast was sharp. The tribal wife chose family. The modern mistress chose finance. Both strategies faced the ultimate test. Meanwhile, the coalition forces tore Iraq apart. The hunt for Saddam lasted 8 months. He changed locations every few hours. His circle of trust shrank to a handful of bodyguards. During this time, the wives went dark. No phone calls, no press releases, no pleas for mercy. Silence was their only shield. They understood the new reality. To be a Hussein was a death sentence. It ended on December 13, 2003. Operation Red Dawn. Special forces surrounded a farm near Tikrit. They found a hole in the ground covered by a styrofoam block and a rug. A man crawled out. He was dirty. He was disoriented. The footage shows an American medic checks the prisoner's hair for lice. The man opens his mouth for a flashlight inspection. The beard is gray and matted. The once mighty dictator was reduced to a patient in a field tent. The era was over. 2003. The world changed in a single moment. In Jordan and Lebanon, television screens flickered with the same grainy footage. A bearded man, a doctor examining him. 2 women watched these images in absolute silence. Sajida and her counterpart saw the man who had defined their existence reduced to a dirty prisoner. The footage shows shock on their faces, hands covering mouths. But their ordeal did not end with his arrest. It was just beginning. The capture of the dictator triggered a chain reaction that targeted them next. Why did the situation escalate so quickly? The Americans wanted leverage, and the women were the closest link to the fallen leader. The period between Saddam's capture in 2003 and his execution in 2006 became a test of endurance. These were the most dangerous years. They were legal ghosts, too dangerous to be free, too high profile to be ignored. They existed in a gray zone of international law and regional politics. Sajida had gathered her daughters, Baghdad and Rana. They packed what they could and fled across the border to Jordan. King Abdullah II granted them asylum. He claimed it was on humanitarian grounds, but it was a calculated risk. The king walked a tightrope between the anger of his Western allies and the sympathy of the Arab street. Sanctuary came with a price. The conditions were ironclad. No interviews with the press, no political rallies, no calls to the resistance. Silence was the only currency accepted. The Jordanian government moved them into a villa in Amman's wealthy Abdoun district. It was comfortable, but it was far from the gold-plated palaces of Baghdad. At first glance, a life of quiet luxury, but in reality, a high-security prison. Sajida found herself under a microscope. Jordanian intelligence officers sat in parked cars down the street. They logged every visitor. They recorded every phone call. Agents vetted every delivery boy who approached the gate. She could walk through the garden, but she could not leave the city without a government permit. It was a golden cage, but the walls were closing in. Financial pressure mounted immediately. The millions of dollars Sajida had managed to smuggle out in suitcases began to disappear. The costs were staggering. Legal fees for Saddam's defense team ran into the millions. Security bills skyrocketed. Supporting her daughters and grandchildren drained the accounts. Witnesses from this period describe a humiliating ritual. Sajida opened her jewelry boxes. She sold diamonds, emeralds, and gold sets to local dealers. Piece by piece, she liquidated her past to buy her future. Each sale was a small surrender. Her daughters, Ragad and Rana, faced their own private war. They were widows of the Kamel brothers. Their husbands had defected to Jordan in 1995. Then they made a fatal error. They returned to Iraq. Saddam promised mercy. Instead, he ordered their execution. Now, the sisters raised the children of the men their father killed. They lived in the shadow of a dead regime. July 2006. The fragile peace in Jordan shattered. Ragad Hussein could not sit still. Her sister accepted the golden cage of exile, but Ragad rattled the bars. She held meetings, she made phone calls, she refused to fade into the background. Why did she risk their sanctuary? It seemed reckless, but silence was impossible for a woman with her political ambition. The backlash was immediate. Jordanian intelligence intercepted the communications. The accusation hit the news wires. Ragad was financing the Iraqi insurgency. She was funding operations against the new government in Baghdad. Whether this was a hard fact or a political pretext is still debated. At first glance, a security measure, but in reality, a signal to the world that Jordan was cutting ties with the toxic legacy of Saddam. Sajida watched from the sidelines. She saw the headlines. She felt the shift in the atmosphere. Her daughter was now a liability. The matriarch was powerless. She could only wait as the walls of their safe haven began to close in. But the situation was different in the north. Samira's life in Lebanon was a daily gamble. There was no royal protection here, no structured sanctuary. Lebanon was a fractured state with a weak central government and complex sectarian lines. Samira did not have guards. She had fixers, lawyers, businessmen, brokers. Each one demanded a cut of her dwindling cash reserves. She became a ghost. 1 month in Beirut, 2 weeks in Sidon, a few days in Tripoli. She never unpacked fully. She moved constantly, checking the rearview mirror. 2 threats stalked her: Iraqi agents seeking blood revenge and international investigators seeking stolen gold. The woman who once commanded the attention of a nation now worked desperately to remain invisible. The financial hunt was relentless. Samira was not just a wife, she was a vault. As the second wife, she was deeply entrenched in Saddam's international dealings. Investigators traced the wires: Swiss bank accounts, real estate in Austria, shell companies in France. The documents show signatures matching her handwriting on massive transfer orders. It was a complex web. But the hunters were patient. Every frozen account was a blow. Every seized property was a loss of leverage. The safety net was tearing apart. Events accelerated. Both women watched the endgame on television screens. The trial of Saddam Hussein was broadcast across the Arab world. It was a surreal spectacle. The footage records Saddam shouting at the judge, pointing fingers, straightening his jacket. He stood in the dock, arguing, disrupting, trying to command authority over a court that held his life in its hands. His world collapsed live on air. Sajida and Samira made no public statements. They gave no interviews. They maintained a suffocating silence. November 5th, 2006. The gavel fell. Death by hanging. The women knew what this meant. The status of wife would soon dissolve. They would become the widows of an executed criminal. In the harsh political arithmetic of the Middle East, this shift brings new enemies. It strips away the last layer of immunity. There was no turning back. December 30th, 2006, 6 in the morning. The camera captures the final moments. Dark stairs, masked men, the loop of a rope. Saddam walked to the gallows. Voices taunted him from the dark. He did not beg. The trapdoor opened, thus ended the era. 6 in the morning. That was the time the executioner tightened the noose. While the rope did its work, 2 women in different countries waited for the phone to ring. The news would shatter their exile. The execution wasn't private. It was filmed on a cheap mobile phone. Within minutes, the footage leaked online. The video shows grainy pixels, a chaotic room, and the trapdoor swinging open. It was not just the death of a dictator. It was the final cut of the thread connecting these women to absolute power. In Amman, Jordan, Sajida sat in her villa. Her daughters surrounded her. Witnesses later described the atmosphere. The television played the footage. But there were no screams, no wailing demonstrations of sorrow, no dramatic collapses on the floor. Why was the widow so silent? It seemed unnatural, but decades of survival had hardened her. Sajida, 69 years old, simply sat. She stared at the carpet. Occasionally, she murmured a short prayer. Her reaction was a reflex honed by years of living with a tyrant. She learned long ago that in Saddam's court, public emotion was a luxury. A tear could be a death sentence, but beneath the stone face, a crisis began. Under Islamic law, the first wife owns the rights to the body. Sajida wanted to claim the remains. She wanted a burial according to tribal custom. But the new masters of Baghdad had no interest in tradition. At first glance, a logistical decision, but in reality, a political weapon. The Iraqi government moved fast. They refused to let the dictator's grave become a shrine for insurgents. They loaded the body onto a transport vehicle. They drove to Al-Auja, near Tikrit. The camera records, soldiers digging a hole in the night. No family members present, no formal procession. They buried him in the dirt of his birthplace. The family was banned from the site. For Sajida, this denial was a sharp blade. In Arab culture, a proper burial is a fundamental human dignity. Without it, the humiliation is total. But this was only the beginning. Sajida tried to fight the decision. She made calls, she contacted Jordanian officials, she sent messages through diplomatic back channels, she demanded access. But every door slammed shut. The officials in Baghdad ignored her. The execution triggered a dangerous shift. While Saddam breathed in his cell, the women retained a dark prestige. They were the family of a head of state. But the moment his neck snapped, the protection evaporated. They were no longer royalty in exile. They were simply the relatives of a dead war criminal. For Samira in Lebanon, the danger was immediate. The news broke on every channel. Her location was known. Within days, her phone began to ring. These were not calls of sympathy. They were death threats. Shia militias were watching. The message was clear. The dictator is gone, and you are next. The hunting season had opened. Late 2006. The hangman's knot ended Saddam's life, but it started a new hunt. His death was a signal. Enemies of the regime openly called for blood. Not just the dictator's blood, the blood of his entire lineage. In Beirut, the phone rang. Lebanese intelligence delivered a short message: get out. She was no longer welcome. The authorities made it clear, protection was over. She had weeks, maybe only hours. Why did the safe haven turn hostile? Political winds shifted instantly, but staying meant death. Her flight from Lebanon was not an evacuation. It was a smuggling operation. No private jets, no VIP terminals. She used false documents and a nondescript car. The driver checked the rearview mirrors constantly. They bypassed the airport entirely. Too many cameras, too many scanners. Instead, they drove toward the border. The destination was Syria. This was before the ruin, before the civil war tore the country apart. Bashar al-Assad still held an iron grip. He offered shelter to the former Baathists, at first glance, a sanctuary, but in reality, a cage. She lived under a fake name. The curtains stayed drawn. She rarely ventured out into the daylight. Every security guard was also a spy. Assad's protection was not a gift. It was leverage. He could withdraw it at the snap of a finger. 200 miles south, in Jordan, the situation tightened around Sajida. The execution in Baghdad emboldened the new Iraqi government. Official documents crossed the border, extradition requests. They wanted the wife. They wanted the daughters. The paperwork listed no specific crimes. Their crime was their last name. They were symbols of the old regime, and Baghdad wanted those symbols behind bars. Jordan refused. King Abdullah cited humanitarian grounds, but the pressure was crushing. The king sat in the middle of a geopolitical minefield. On one side, the street. Palestinians and Jordanians viewed Saddam as a martyr. Handing over his wife would trigger riots. On the other side, the West. Washington and the Gulf states wanted the Hussein file closed permanently. So, a compromise was born. The king refused the extradition, but he tightened the screws. The goal was simple. Make life so unbearable they would leave on their own. Events accelerated. Sajida's world shrank. Her residency permit was revoked. It was replaced with a temporary paper, valid for 3 months, then 2. Every renewal was a lesson in humiliation. She stood in lines. She waited for stamps. The message was clear. You do not belong here. But money was the real weapon. Her bank accounts froze. Access to remaining funds vanished. Then came the cruelest cut. The grandchildren. Visas were denied. Border guards turned them away. The family was sliced apart by bureaucracy. Sajida sat in a gilded cage, isolated from the next generation. The camera records no physical wounds, but the psychological toll was absolute. 30 years. That was how long they sat at the pinnacle of Iraq. Servants opened every door. Generals bowed their heads. One word from Sajida or Samira could destroy a life. But now, the script had flipped. They were no longer royalty. They were refugees on expired time. The transition was violent. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a vertical drop into irrelevance. Governments that once courted them now viewed them as toxic waste. Diplomats avoided their calls. But the sharpest knife came from within the house. The execution of the dictator did not unite the survivors. It shattered them. Why did the clan turn on itself? It seemed they shared a common enemy. But fear was stronger than blood. Cousins erased phone numbers. Nieces changed their names. They wanted to vanish. They wanted the world to forget the name Hussein. Inside the villas of Amman and Doha, the atmosphere was poisonous. Relatives pointed fingers. They blamed the wives. They whispered that Sajida should have bribed more guards. They claimed she sat on mountains of cash while her husband swung from a rope. The clan that once ruled through iron unity tore itself apart, January 1st, 2007. The dawn brought a grim reality. The adrenaline of the trial and execution faded. In its place came the slow rot of exile. Every day was a battle for dignity. Sajida's position in Jordan crumbled. The Iraqi government struck a calculated blow. They placed her name on the most wanted list. They offered a cash reward for her capture. Jordan refused to hand her over, but the label terrorist financier destroyed her safety net. She became radioactive. At first glance, a wealthy widow living in luxury. But in reality, a prisoner in a golden cage. Bank managers who once served her tea now refused to meet her eyes. Accounts were frozen, transfers were blocked. Former friends in high places stopped answering the phone. Even in the affluent districts of Amman, the mood shifted. Shop owners feared sanctions. When Sajida entered, the air grew cold. She was a liability. It got worse. The money began to dry up. The Jordanian government provided a stipend, but they cut it. Then they cut it again. The lifestyle of a queen costs millions. Sajida did not have millions. By 2008, the situation was critical. The camera captures the desperation. A woman who once owned palaces now negotiates in back rooms. Sajida opened her safe. She pulled out a diamond necklace. It was a heavy piece, looted from the Kuwaiti royal family during the 1990 invasion, a relic of war. She did not wear it. She sold it. The deal was done in secret. The buyer knew who she was. He knew she had no leverage. He offered pennies on the dollar. Sajida took the cash. There was no negotiation. Her body began to fail. The stress ate her alive. There were no more private jets to Swiss clinics. No teams of European doctors on standby. Diabetes set in. Her blood sugar spiked uncontrollably. Depression followed like a dark shadow. She sat in silence for days, but she refused treatment. In the world of the Ba'ath Party, mental illness was a disgrace. She built a facade of stone. She pretended to be strong, but inside, the systems were shutting down. Her daughters watched the collapse. There was nothing they could do. 2007. That was the year the cage door slammed shut. Interpol issued a red notice for Baghdad, citing allegations of terrorism financing. But this warrant did more than brand her a criminal. It turned the entire country of Jordan into a prison. She was immobilized, passports were revoked, legal employment was impossible. She retreated behind high walls, living in the crosshairs of assassins. The new Iraqi intelligence services sent a clear message. She was a legitimate target. They wanted her head. There were reports of hit squads and intercepted threats, though the specifics were buried in intelligence files. Baghdad checked the perimeter. She watched the street. Survival became a full-time job. Her younger sister Rana attempted a different strategy. She sought invisibility. She kept her head down. But the legacy of their father, Saddam, was a stain that could not be washed away. The burden fell heaviest on the children. Saddam's grandchildren grew up as stateless entities. The new government in Baghdad stripped them of Iraqi citizenship. Amman refused to grant them Jordanian passports. They were legal ghosts. The footage shows black SUVs transporting children to elite private schools. Inside the classrooms, they answered to assumed names. They studied math and history beside the children of diplomats and businessmen. The classmates had no idea. They did not know they shared a desk with the direct descendants of the most notorious dictator of the century. But the isolation worsened. How do you completely erase a powerful family? You don't need a firing squad. You need paperwork. In 2008, Jordan officially closed the specific section of the Iraqi embassy handling the family's affairs. The channel was cut. There was no one to call. Property claims in Baghdad were ignored. Legal petitions were thrown out. They were non-persons, trapped in a bureaucratic void with no exit. Samira's fate in Syria followed a different trajectory. She fled to Damascus. The Assad regime welcomed her, not out of charity, but for leverage. They kept old Ba'athists close as a bargaining chip against the new leaders in Iraq. Samira settled in the Mez district. At first glance, a standard upscale neighborhood, but in reality, a highly monitored security zone. She lived among intelligence officers and generals. Surveillance was absolute. Phones were tapped, visitors were logged, but this constant watch provided a shield. No assassin could get close without Assad's permission. For a brief window, from 2007 to 2010, the tension broke. Samira found stability. She had salvaged enough cash from the fall of Baghdad to live comfortably. It was not the gold-plated luxury of the palaces, but it was safe. She made a choice. She stepped out of the game. She cut ties with the resistance. She ignored the Iraqi opposition. She faded into the background. Reports describe a woman alone in a room, standing before an easel. Samira took up painting. It was a habit from her youth. She created abstract works, chaotic shapes on canvas. She showed them to no one. They were private exercises in therapy. But this silence was fragile. 2011 changed the map again. The Arab Spring hit Syria. The streets of Damascus filled with shouting crowds. The regime turned its guns on the people. The civil war began. The sanctuary was gone.